Hey guys, welcome back to Gaming Gig. There are a lot of controllers out there, and Nintendo has a lot of controllers. They're all very different, and that got us wondering, which Nintendo controller is the best controller? So, we've decided to rank every Nintendo controller. We're talking about only the original controller for each Nintendo console. So we will be ranking these using 5 categories: ergonomics, the D-pad/sticks, buttons, innovation, and then the last category is our personal bias. What do we think about the controller?
I wanted to start us here with the original Nintendo Entertainment System controller. Yeah, so I have this this blocky beauty in my hand right now, and I gotta say, it does bring back some memories for me. You know, I don't know about you, but I did start on an NES.
I always felt that the NES controller was not that comfortable. I don't like the sharp edges, the corners. They kind of, during long play sessions, tend to jam into your hand.
Well, the modern gamer is pampered.
That is true. It's pretty uncomfortable. I'm going to give it a 4.
A 4?
A 4. The button placement is comfortable, but I have to say, after long sessions, my thumbs can kind of cramp up because they're kind of, always bent.
I'll tell you what I don't like about it. And it's a similar problem that some of the newer controllers we'll talk about have, is that there's nothing to hold on to. There's like no handles,
Yeah.
But I will say that it not having shoulder buttons so that my index fingers can wrap around the back really helped that. So it's not that much of an issue. But I'm going to go with a 5. So that brings us to a total of 9. The D-pad is fine. I think I would go with like a 6 or a 7 maybe.
It's a really good D-pad.
Yeah.
I have no problems with the D-pad on here. In fact, I think they haven't gotten much better on the D-pads than the original. It is a little plasticky, which kind of brings it down a few points for me. So I'm going to say, saying 10 is the best D-pad you can have. This one, I think, is an 8. I think it's a pretty good D-pad.
Yeah, I'm feeling it now, and it's like, it does have a little bit of a mush to it, which I like. But there's no doubt when it engages, which is really what you want anyway. So I think I'm going to improve I'm going to go with a 7. So that would bring us to a 15. What you think about the buttons, Randall?
The buttons on the NES controller have a little bit of concaveness to them, and I think that feels really good. They're clicky enough and mushy enough. They're kind of in that perfect sweet spot. I think there are only a couple buttons on here. I like the A and B buttons. I have to say the start and select buttons.
I love the start and select buttons.
You like that super mush? Yes. I personally hate it.
Oh, I love it.
I've always felt like I could never really tell that I was actually pressing start or select when I pressed them. I really don't like them. So I think the A and B buttons are great, although they're a little plasticky for my taste. But in terms of the click, they're really good. But the start and select buttons are going to bring the overall button score down for me because I really dislike them. I'm going to say that overall, I'm going to give the buttons probably a 7.
I think I'm going to have to go with an 8. So another 15. All right, so level of innovation for the NES controller.
This was the one, man. This one innovated the D-pad. I know that the D-pad actually came around on a Game & Watch system, but this was the first home console that used a D-pad. So you got to give it tons of points just for that. I mean, has there been hardly a mainline controller that didn't have a D-pad or that hasn't had a D-pad since?
Maybe there's one we'll talk about later.
So innovation-wise, this one is pretty great. I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10 for innovation.
Yep, I'm going to agree. So let's go with an 18 there. Now let's talk personal bias. This is the category that we're going to enjoy and everybody else is going to get mad about.
If you gave me any controller out of our list today and said you've got to play an entire game with one of these controllers, I mean, obviously it depends on the game, but in general, the one I would look forward to the least because it's so uncomfortable to hold because of these sharp corners is this one. So personal bias-wise, this is probably, just because it's so ergonomically poor, I'm going to have to rank this one pretty low. I'm going to say it's a 5.
Well, I did start on the NES, and I just think it looks so cool. I love that, retro look. And there are some controllers on here that I've spent sizably less time with and would be less excited to be handed. So, what'd you go with, a 5? I'm going to have to go a little higher than that. I'm going to go 7.
So that brings our grand total for the NES up to a 69.
So, moving on chronologically through Nintendo's history here, leaving the NES, we come to the Super Nintendo, which I spent quite some time with. I've got this thing in my hands now, and it really does bring back a lot of memories for me.
And my main complaint on the NES was those pointy corners. And they knew that was bad because they fixed it with the Super Nintendo controller. This one has that dog bone shape.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of a rounded off sides.
Oh!
The D-pad is less plasticky feeling. So it's a little more comfortable.
It has like a softer feel to me.
Just a little bit. Yeah, it's like a textured plastic, and it just feels a little bit better. It's still got those awful start and select buttons. In fact, these feel even worse than the NES somehow.
I disagree. I think they're a little less spongy. You really think they're worse? Like, I mean, I know when you say worse, you mean spongier.
Yes, they're spongy. Well,
really? Compare these things.
These still feel bad now.
I honestly, I just love the spongy start and select so much that I honestly like the NES better in that regard. I don't know why. I just love that feeling.
I guess they're about the same. They're pretty bad. Ergonomic wise, this is a comfortable controller to hold. The only thing that makes it a little uncomfortable is that it doesn't have any grips or like any sort of handles to really hold on to. So I can't give it a perfect score, although it is really comfortable to hold in your hands. If the NES was a 4, this one is up to a 7. If it had some handles, man, it would be really good. It would be in a really high score.
Yeah, I think you're in the right ballpark here. I think I might go all the way up to an 8. I really like the way this feels. It fits my hands well. So 7 and 8, that's 15. All right, let's talk about the D-pad on this bad boy. I really like the D-pad on the Super Nintendo. It's always been one of my favorites.
It's what I think of when I think of a good D-pad. I think of the Super Nintendo controller. It's kind of like, in my mind, the gold standard.
Yeah.
Because it just feels right to me, it's a 10.
Yeah, all the things I said about the NES, about how it's a little spongy, but you know when it engages, I feel like that's even more refined on the SNES. I'm with you. I think we're going perfect 20 on this. Talk to the buttons, Randy.
I have always thought that the buttons on a Super Nintendo controller remind me of candy. The A and B buttons look like Sprees, and the X and Y buttons look like Smarties.
Yeah, that's why, if I remember correctly, you spent some time in the emergency room when we were young because you ate a couple of these.
Hey, I couldn't help myself.
And they didn't dissolve.
You know, having the A and B buttons be different in terms of they're convex,
right,
and the X and Y are concave, it really makes a lot of sense, especially with how you hold the controller. You kind of put the tip of your thumb on the X and Y buttons, and it kind of sinks into the buttons. And the A and B buttons you kind of press with maybe the joint of your thumb, and it just feels right. They just got it right in terms of the buttons.
Yeah, I agree. I've always thought that concave versus convex felt really nice. I've never really thought about eating these things like you, but I love these buttons, and I like them quite a bit more than the NES buttons. I think I'm going to go with an 8.
I'm going to go 8 as well. They're pretty great. If they weren't as plasticky as they are, I would rank them higher, but they feel really good. They're just the perfect amount of spongy and clicky. They got it right.
All right, so level of innovation on the SNES controller. I mean, coming from the NES, they did add shoulder buttons, and they also added X and Y.
Yeah, we got a lot more buttons. We went from 2 buttons, or from 2 main buttons, to 6 main buttons, which really helped. That really made the games that were coming out, which were more complex, and made them much more playable.
Absolutely.
So innovation-wise, this is just a more is better sort of thing. But that doesn't mean it's very innovative. It just helped.
Yeah, and I don't honestly know. I mean, was there another system around this time that was already doing something like that? I mean, the Genesis had, the 3 main buttons.
Right, and then the 6 in the controller later that had the 6, and then it also had shoulder buttons as well.
Yeah.
So, but this to me is a more comfortable controller. But innovation-wise, I don't think this is super innovative. I just think it's a smart move, and for that reason, I'm going to have to rank it semi-low, but kind of in the middle on the innovation scale. I'm going to say it's a 6.
I think I'm going to go with a 5, so that's going to bring it to an 11. Okay, let's get biased.
The Super Nintendo controller for me is one that I look back on really fondly. I really enjoyed playing the Super Nintendo as a kid. It's maybe not my most nostalgic controller, but I still have a lot of nostalgia for it. It's maybe not my favorite controller, but it's up there.
Oh yeah.
I think I'm going to give this one a 7 out of just personal bias. If I had to just put a number on it, I'd say it's a 7.
Yeah, I have a lot of really fond memories playing this thing. I mean, renting games. I even, strangely enough, I remember playing a lot of NBA Jam with my mom on the Super Nintendo. I didn't have any siblings, so like, and she would beat me. Like, it was crazy. But I love the SNES and I love the controller. I'm going to have to go with a 9. So what did you give it, a 7?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a 16. So the SNES grand total is a 78. Okay, moving on to the black sheep of the Nintendo family.
That's right, the N64 controller.
Let me unwind this cable that is wound in an extremely nostalgic fashion for me. Oh yeah, that's the stuff, Randy. That's the stuff memories are made of right there. Immediately, the thing that comes to mind for me is for 2 controllers in a row now, we've mentioned a gripe we had with the ergonomics, and the next generation fixed it.
That's right. We actually have some handles to hold on to.
Yes, but I think I would make the argument that they went a little overboard with the handles. I didn't need 3. I've only got 2 hands. I didn't need 3, Nintendo.
Yes, it is a little bit strange. The trident look is a little awkward, and when you look at this controller, or when the first time you come to this controller, you have no idea how to hold it.
No. In fact, I don't think I ever learned.
No, you hold this controller very strange. So the way you're supposed to hold it is that your right hand goes on the outside of the right side, and then your left hand can change between the middle handle and the left handle, depending on what game you're playing. If it's a game that needs the D-pad, you go for the left, and if it's a game that uses the joystick, you go in the middle. I held it the way Nintendo intended, and although it's a little awkward, it's, to me, makes sense, but it is a little strange.
Yeah. I understand that for you normal-handed plebeians, that makes sense. But I had large hands even as a child, apparently. So I always keep my left hand on the outside of the controller, and if I need the joystick, I just reach over with my left thumb. Now that puts my index finger, or my 4 main fingers on my left hand at a weird spot, so I don't hit Z with that hand, I hit it with the middle finger on my right hand. So it's super weird in retrospect that that's how I learned how to do it, but it just doesn't feel right to do it any other way now. I mean, I made it work for me, and back in the day I would have never talked about this controller being anything but comfortable. But now that I'm a little older and I've got more to compare it to, I can see its flaws.
Ergonomic wise, I'm going to have to say that although I personally find this to be pretty comfortable, it is a little weird, and I have to take that into account. So, this one for me is a 5.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go with a 3. So that would bring us to an 8. So D-pad and stick. We have a stick now.
We do. The D-pad is fairly similar to the Super Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, there were hardly any games that use this D-pad. And for some reason, this D-pad feels just a little bit worse to me.
Yeah, me too.
And I can't exactly explain why, but to say that it feels a little more loose and maybe like it's not as precise.
Uh-huh. I think that's a common theme for the N64 in general.
Yeah.
A little loose, not very precise.
The stick is awful.
It is just awful.
When I was a kid, I didn't have any problems with it.
No.
Besides that it gave me blisters, which
well,
I guess
that's just Mario Party's fault.
which I guess is a big problem. But now that I've played a lot of, I've held a lot more controllers that have joysticks, this one is, understands the first.
Mm-hmm. And that may give it some points in a later category.
But in this case, the first happened to also be the worst. This is a bad stick.
And have you seen that Nintendo actually sold a protective glove?
Yes, to protect you from blisters from when you're playing Mario Party.
Yeah, if you have to sell a protective glove because of your joystick, you're not going to get a high ranking here. I'm going to give it a 3.
Yeah, I'm going to say, in terms of sticks and D-pad, the D-pad's good. The D-pad, in my mind, is like maybe a 6 or a 7.
Yeah.
That's probably a 7. It's good. Mm-hmm. It's a good D-pad. The stick is like a 2. So I'm going to go somewhere in between. I'm going to give it a 4.
All right. That means we have a total of 7. Killing it so far in 64. All right, let's talk buttons.
So these buttons are very plasticky, very cheap and plasticky feeling. They do get that perfect balance the Nintendo seems to get of sponginess and clickiness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty good. But otherwise, the buttons are just kind of cheap feeling.
Yeah, I actually like these buttons quite a bit, and I know that the addition of C buttons has caused some problems in recent years with trying to play N64 controllers on more modern, conventional controller layouts. but I always really liked them. And I've got no problem with the way any of the buttons feel. You know, we finally got away from that spongy start button that I loved so much, but I still like this one quite a bit. I really have no complaints with the buttons. I think I'm going to give them an 8.
Oh, really? I just think they're too plasticky feeling. They feel good to press, but they're too plasticky for me, so I'm going to give them a 6.
Okay, that's a 14. Okay, innovation. Let's make up some ground, N64.
This was the first joystick on any home console.
Mm-hmm.
And there has not been a controller for a console that didn't have a joystick since. At least not that I can think of. Oh, except the Wii controller. Oh, so.
Oh, the Wii Remote, yeah.
Well, this is, yeah.
But, I mean, you often paired that with a nunchuck and all that. But.
So for innovating the joystick, I've got to give this a high number.
Mm-hmm.
It's strange, it's weird, so I'm going to knock it down a point or two because of that. I would give it a perfect 10 for innovating the joystick, but because of the crazy trident look they decided to go on, or to go with, I'm going to knock it down a few points. So I'm going to give this an 8 in terms of innovation.
Okay, I'm gonna appeal right now and try to change your mind.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
I think this deserves a 10 out of 10 from both of us for innovation because of that joystick. And I think if you knock points off because of the trident shape, you're holding ergonomics, which is a separate category, against it. I think you're going into double jeopardy territory there. I mean, I would make the argument that the joystick might be the most important innovation for a modern gaming controller ever. And because this is the first, I'm going with a 10. You're your own man, but
Okay.
that's my argument.
You convinced me. I'm going to go with a 9.
Okay, I'll take it. All right, let's get biased. For me personally, I don't think I hold a stronger bias towards a gaming console than an N64.
I don't either. It was my childhood.
Yeah.
The N64, when I think of what it was to be a kid and what I did for fun, it was the N64.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, it was the games and not the controller.
Yes, true.
But still, the controller is deeply tied to those memories.
Especially with the N64 because it's so unique.
Absolutely.
C buttons and all that jazz.
I'm going to say, for me, bias-wise, just because I love the N64 so much, I've got to give this a 9.
I'm going 10 again. I'm going with a 10, so that's a 19. So let's total this up.
That brings us to a 67 for the N64.
Okay, moving on to, in my mind, what is kind of the first more modern Nintendo console. And I tell you what, the cable's long. This is something I don't miss. Unwinding cables, ready. So I've got the GameCube. Yeah, I bet you can hear those triggers. Yep, we got those notches in the joysticks. We got 2 joysticks now. We got a C stick instead of C buttons. Yeah, that hits me right in the feels. Hits me right in the melee feels.
I remember the first time I held a GameCube controller, and it was at your house because you were the first person I knew that had a GameCube.
Yep.
And I remember holding this controller and thinking it was the weirdest controller I had ever held.
And coming from the N64, that's high praise.
The button layout looked so strange to me. All the buttons were different shapes and different sizes.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of C buttons, we had this weird C stick, which had a tiny little knob on it. The D-pad looked like it had been shrunken down to a fraction of what it should actually be.
It's small. It's like almost the same size as like a Game Boy Advance or something. I mean, it's pretty small.
I think it's smaller than the D-pad on a Game Boy Advance. This thing is tiny.
I mean, we could compare that if we wanted to. Just have to go to a different room and get the Game Boy.
In hindsight, I think that it feels good in your hand. I will say that. It feels really good ergonomically.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that in terms of just purely holding it, it does feel good. Although I still think it looks bizarre, it does feel good in your hands.
Mm-hmm.
The shoulder buttons for me are in a pretty good location. I know you've told me that you do not like the position of the L and R buttons.
Yeah.
But for me, they're in a pretty good spot. I have to say, ergonomic-wise, this is pretty good. This is nice and solid. I got to give this maybe an 8 ergonomic-wise, even though I still think it looks weird.
Yeah, I think I'm agreeing with you. I think I'm also going to go with an 8. Yeah, the shoulder button thing for me is a little weird. It's like my index fingers, if I don't curve them enough, they hit the inside of the controller, which makes it feel weird to press the buttons. But it is a very comfortable controller, and when I was a kid, I thought this thing was perfect. Like, I thought we had hit peak gaming controller perfection. So I'm going to go with an 8 as well. That brings our ergonomic total to a 16. So you've already spoken to the very minuscule D-pad, and I agree, that thing is super weird in hindsight. But I do love the sticks. And I also love the cutouts that they've put for the sticks, which really helps with games like Smash and things like that. I love both of those sticks.
Yeah, the kind of notches around the sticks does feel pretty good. That was also on the N64 controller.
Yeah. Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. You're right. And that's something that people modify Pro controllers for Switch now to have, like, for Smash. So
Yeah.
that's something that people really liked.
And I like that they're not as plasticky feeling. They kind of have a rubberized texture on the sticks, which became the standard later on. The N64 was way too plasticky.
Yeah.
The D-pad is awful. This is the worst D-pad just because it's so tiny. Yeah, I couldn't imagine trying to play a game with this. The D-pad is like a 1.
Yeah.
If I could give it a 0, I would. The sticks are pretty good. I don't like how the C-stick is like tiny.
Mm-hmm. It's a little nub.
It's okay. I'm going to say for me, the D-pad is like a 1. The other sticks are like a 7. I'm going to have to go somewhere in between. It's going to be a 4 for the D-pad and sticks because the D-pad is just so bad.
Okay. Well, I really like the sticks. I think the sticks would be like a 9 for me. The D-pad is way too small, so I think I would give that like a 2. So I'm gonna have that would average out to a 5.5. So I'll round up to a 6. What did you give it?
A 4.
Okay, so that's a 10. All right. I know you're itching to talk buttons.
The face buttons, they don't have that perfect level of click and mush. Mm-hmm. They're close though. If they weren't plasticky, I would say that they're probably like a 9 or an 8. But they're a little plasticky, so I'm gonna give the face buttons a 7, and the shoulders. Boy, that Z button feels really bad. Yeah, I'm gonna say this is gonna have to be a 6 on buttons for me.
Okay. So I think you just have higher standards for your plastic than me, because the plasticiness, if anything, just pleases me. It doesn't make me upset at all. And the Z button feels, I agree, it's not a great button. In hindsight, it never bothered me, but it's weird to feel now. And I always thought those shoulder buttons just had way too much travel.
Way too much.
It's super weird. Like,
yeah. It's great for racing games where you just want to add a little bit of acceleration. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't feel good.
But I was always just playing Smash, so it's like, like, I was always just jamming these things all the way down. I'm gonna go with an 8, which brings us to a 14. All right, so level of innovation for the GameCube. I mean, it's got dual joysticks.
That's a big one.
It is. I know the PS1, was out around this time, right? Wasn't that the competing? No, it's
2.
PS2. You're right.
Which had the
PS2.
DualShock.
Yeah, and that was where it was at if you wanted to play like dual joystick games. I don't know that I can honestly say this controller is too innovative. If anything, it was very unique for its time, but modern controllers really didn't follow the trend, except for maybe the offset joysticks.
Yeah, the offset joysticks I like. I still like offset joysticks to this day.
Me too.
I think this controller is comfortable, but in terms of innovation, this is a swing and a miss for me. The strange buttons being all different sizes and shapes. I think it's a good idea in theory, but maybe in practice, it just doesn't work for me. I'm going to say innovation-wise, this is a 3.
Yeah. Well, I will say that the uniqueness of the buttons worked for its day. I'm not trying to say that it didn't work for the games it had, because I always liked it. Even the Y and X being kind of above the A, the A being bigger than the B makes a lot of sense to me because A was your main button. But I really can't say that earns it a lot of innovation points because, like I said, it just didn't stick around. I'll throw it a 5. So that makes it, an 8?
Yep.
All right, let's get biased, Randy.
So I never owned a GameCube. I still have not owned a GameCube. I have played GameCube games on my Wii because the Wii has a GameCube essentially built in. So I don't have a whole lot of nostalgia or bias towards this controller. It's cool in that it almost looks retro-futuristic, but it just is so bizarre. I don't have a whole lot of bias towards this. I'm going to say this is very, very middle for me. I'm going to say it's a 5 in terms of bias.
All right. Well, as I was sitting here listening to you and just kind of thinking about my own memories with this, I spent so much time with this controller and the Wavebird specifically, which I would give anything to have my old Wavebird back. I have no idea where that thing ended up. Tyler or Pulliam or whoever, if you have my Wavebird and you happen to hear this, let me know. I don't know if you're familiar with the Wavebird. It was I think it was the first wireless controller.
I don't think it was the first. I think there were controllers that used maybe the infrared.
Oh,
But I think
okay.
it was the first wireless controller to maybe use like a radio frequency.
Yeah, because you had to plug the receiver in.
Yeah.
But man, that thing was great. It had no rumble, and I didn't care. So I am pretty biased towards this, and I think that has a lot to do with the games that I was playing. But I'm going to throw it a 9 for bias, which brings us to a 14.
For the GameCube, if we total everything up, we are sitting at 62. And that brings us to the Wii next, with the Wii Remote, or the Wiimote.
The Wiimote.
This is a very strange controller because it looks the most different out of all the controllers.
It looks like a television remote.
It's meant to be kind of modular in that, well, not modular, but it's meant to be able to be played multiple different ways. Either kind of held straight forward or turned sideways and used kind of more like a NES controller.
Mm-hmm.
So it has these two different ways to play it or to use it. It has one big A button. It has a D-pad. Ergonomic wise, if you're just holding it the way I think it is generally intended, kind of like a pointer, it's very comfortable. Maybe not the most comfortable, but pretty dang comfortable. If you turn it sideways and try to use it like an NES controller, it's pretty uncomfortable.
Yes, I really don't like this controller. I was one of the people who kind of railed against the Wii. Like, I just wanted to play like better quality games in the same way we'd always done it, and Nintendo went all whole hog in on the gimmick with the Wii. But as far as the ergonomics, holding it in like the pointer fashion, I will say it's not very uncomfortable to me. Holding it sideways, like you said, feels kind of dumb.
It works, but just barely.
Yeah. I mean, it would be like passable, I guess. So for ergonomics, I'm going to throw it a 4.
I think I am completely in agreement with you on this. I think I'm also going to give it a 4. It just is not very comfortable when you use it like an NES controller. And although it's comfortable using it like a pointer, I think they could have made it more ergonomic. I think of controllers that are similar in terms of the way they look, like the PlayStation Move controller. Is that what it's called?
I'm not familiar with that. I'm not sure.
Well, the PlayStation controller, that's basically the equivalent. Yeah. It is much more comfortable to hold than this one. Although this one's not uncomfortable. So I'm agreeing. 4.
Yeah.
That puts us at an 8 for ergonomics.
All right, tell me about that D-pad, because as we all know, it doesn't have a stick on its own. You got to pair that thing with a nunchuck.
Right, and the D-pad on this is just about the same in terms of size as the GameCube controller. I will say it feels a little better. I have played a good bit of platformers and stuff using this controller, and the D-pad does work pretty well, but it is really small.
Yeah.
It's not a great D-pad. You know, I'm going to say it's very middling. It's like a 5. It's just too small. There could be a better D-pad on this.
It is small, but I will say that it feels nice to me. It's got a nice pivot to it. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to throw it a 6.
All right, that puts us at 11 for the D-pad.
All right, so as far as buttons go,
we've got a few. We've got the A button. We've got the 1 and 2 buttons. And we've got I think it's the B button on the back, or what do they call it? Do they call it Z?
That's B.
B on the back, yeah. B button on the back.
Yep. And we've also got a plus, minus, and a home, and a power button.
Yeah.
They feel okay to me. I mean, they have a nice clickiness to them, but they're not in like over clicky territory.
The A button nails that perfect squishy / clicky that's just right. The 1 and 2 buttons are very clicky, which I'm okay with. The B button on the back feels really good.
Yeah, I do agree with you about that A button. That feels nice.
The A button feels really good, and that's the main one you're going to use, and it feels perfect to me. Mm-hmm. The buttons to me on this I think they feel pretty good. I'm going to say that this is a 7 in terms of buttons. That B button on the back is nice and clicky. It feels like what Nintendo started doing with their triggers. You know, It's like that was the first one that feels like the rest of them.
You know, I kind of like how the buttons you're going to use to play, like, okay, the A, the 1, and the 2, feel less clicky than the plus, minus. I just like having that differentiation there, and it's like I'm not going to accidentally hit plus, minus. Mm-hmm. I like these buttons quite a bit, honestly. I didn't expect to like them as much as I do. I think I'm going to throw them a 9.
Yeah.
All right, that brings buttons to a 16. So here's where the Wii might pull ahead a little bit. Let's talk about innovation.
This was the controller that innovated motion controls.
Yep.
this is a thing that now a lot of controllers, even if they're just like, say, like the PS4 controller or the PS5 controller, they have motion controls built in. The Switch Pro controller, all these have motion controls built in. This was the one that really started that, got that going. But they went whole hog. Still, though, the Wii kind of speaks for itself in terms of sales.
Yeah,
this was a huge innovation.
Huge.
I don't know that it's joystick level of innovation in terms of like the N64. I think I gave the N64 a 9.
You did.
And
I tried to sway you to a 10, but I pulled you up from an 8.
This one being so big on motion controls, I'll tell you, this felt huge at the time. It felt bigger than joystick.
It did.
Maybe in hindsight it wasn't as big of a deal, but it felt bigger at the time. So I think I'm going to have to kind of match and just say this one's a 9 on innovation because it was just such a big deal.
Well, I agree with you. It was a huge deal, and I think because of the fact that although it might have felt like it was going to change everything, and in a lot of ways it did, but maybe not as... It didn't become such a staple as the joystick. I still think the Wii falls into gimmick category instead of just being completely game-changing. So I'm going to throw it an 8. So that brings it up to a 17. All right, so for my personal bias with the Wii Remote specifically, it's not good, I will say. I kind of resisted the complete focus on motion controls. I had a lot of great times with Wii Sports, now I will say, and that wouldn't have been possible without the Wii Remote. But I don't know. I mean, for bias, I may have to throw it like a 2 or a 3.
I had a Wii when it was huge. I enjoyed playing the Wii when it was huge, but this is the system that kind of got me out of gaming for a little while in terms of the games just didn't hook me. I enjoyed it. I thought it was cool, but it kind of made gaming a more casual experience that made me a little less interested in gaming in general. So I'm going to have to give this a 4.
Okay, well, I'll go with my higher score and say 3. So that makes it a 7. So that brings the Wiimote's grand total to a 59.
So now it's time to talk about the Wii U and the Wii U Gamepad, which was the main controller for the Wii U.
Yeah, this thing is crazy feeling. I really liked it.
It's big, it's chunky.
It is very big. The buttons are spaced out. The D-pad is massive. I will say it's not uncomfortable.
No, I personally love the way this feels. To me, this, for some reason, the gamepad just melts into my hands. I think it's just because it's so big.
Yeah.
And the buttons are huge. Well, they're not the buttons are huge, but they're really, like you said, they're really spaced out. The D-pad feels pretty good.
How do you feel about about having to reach up for those shoulder buttons?
Oh, it doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah.
It's just all so big, it just feels right.
Yeah.
I love the shelf on the back that keeps it held up without you really having to hold it.
Yep.
To me, this one is great on the ergonomics. I don't know that I want to give it a perfect 10 because I think there are better controllers, maybe not better mainline Nintendo controllers in terms of ergonomics, but in terms of Nintendo controllers for ergonomics, this one is top of the list for me. I've got to give it a 9 in ergonomics.
Yeah, honestly, I think I agree with you. I've slided some controllers in the past for not taking into account my massive bear paws here. And the Wii U Gamepad is not one of those controllers. When we were playing Smash 4 all the time, nobody wanted to use the gamepad. So I just started using the gamepad. I also needed a new contact prescription really bad. So I couldn't see the TV from very far away. So I would just always volunteer to use the gamepad, and I would just play on the gamepad. And I really liked it. So I'm going to have to give it an 8 for ergonomics. And I'm really close to a 9, honestly. What did you give it, a 9?
I gave it a 9, yeah.
You know what? I'm going to give it a 9 as well. Let's go 18. All right, D-pads and sticks. Now, one thing I want to mention before we forget. This is where the sticks became clicky.
So the sticks can click in, which is kind of cool, but that has happened. That happened way before on the PlayStation controllers. They can do that for a
But not on Nintendo.
Yeah. The D-pad, it's big again, which is great, but it's probably the worst feeling big D-pad out of all the Nintendo D-pads. It feels okay. It's not bad. The sticks, I really like the way they feel. They're very fluid. They're big. They're rubberized. They feel great. The only problem with the sticks is that they're both at the top, which I don't like. They're too far up.
Yeah.
If they were offset, I think this would be perfect. But because they're both at the top, I gotta knock off a few points because of that. So D-pad and sticks. These sticks are great, but they're in the wrong place, or at least one of them is.
Mm-hmm.
The D-pad just feels okay. This is a 6.5. Oh gosh, do I want to lean 6 or do I want to lean 7?
I mean, if it's a 6.5, mathematically speaking, you'd have to go 7.
Okay, I'm gonna go 7. The sticks feel really good. If this one was moved down, I would lean almost towards an 8.
Mm-hmm.
The D-pad is just okay.
Well, I will say that I think one could make the argument that stick placement would be an ergonomic failure, not a stick failure. But I would say that because this thing's so big, it doesn't even bother me at all to have the D-pad a little lower because it still feels kind of high up.
Mm-hmm.
So I am going to go 8. So that would bring us to a 15. Okay, so buttons. Oh, I just turned it on. I think these buttons feel quite nice, I gotta say, and the spacing certainly helps. And I think I might be firing up Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze there if you want to play a level.
The buttons feel pretty good. They're nice and clicky, but in a good way. They're about that right amount.
Yeah, they have a nice give, but there's no doubt when it engages.
They have what is now the signature Nintendo triggers on them. Yeah, these buttons feel pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to give the buttons a 7.
Yeah. I was thinking 8 or 7. I think I'm going to go with the 7 as well. They do feel just a little weak. Not that they don't come back, but just being nitpicky. I'm going to go with the 7. So that's 14, right? Okay, so innovation. I mean, this is kind of Nintendo's thing, is innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's no secret you can see a direct lineage from the Wii U Gamepad to what becomes the Switch.
Right.
And I thought it was super cool then, and I think it's super cool now.
This is something that the idea for the Wii U Gamepad eventually became something huge.
Mm-hmm.
But this itself was not the thing. This was kind of like the idea that led to it.
It was a half measure.
It was. So do we give it high points because it eventually led to something that was groundbreaking, which is the Switch? Although this was not it.
I do think it deserves some points. I didn't know another console that I could grab a gamepad off a charger and play Smash while somebody else watched a movie. Not even in the same room. You know, I could go to a different room. Mm-hmm. And the Wii U Gamepad let me do that.
I think that it was innovative, but because it wasn't its ultimate form, I'm going to have to knock a few points off.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that for innovation, I'm going to give this an 8.
I was thinking 8 as well. I think 8's fair. So 16. All right, Randy, talk to me about your bias for the Wii U Gamepad.
So I don't have a whole lot of nostalgia for the Wii U, probably because it's one of the newer consoles, and I really didn't even start playing it until recently. So in terms of bias, I think it's really cool. I'm not really sure. I think I'm going to have to go somewhere like just an average score of like a 7 for bias for me.
Okay. Well, you know, like I said earlier, I would play Smash on the gamepad. And you know I have a lot of bias and nostalgia for Smash in all forms, even if it was Smash 4, which isn't my favorite game. Also, like I said, being able to, you know, travel to a different room with this thing and play games while somebody else uses the TV. I do have a lot of fond memories of that. So I think I'm going to have to go with an 8.
So that puts us at 15.
All right, so the grand total for the Wii U is a 78. All right, let's talk Switch, Randy, which I know we both played a minute or two on.
I have played the Switch so much. And for the first year or so of owning a Switch, I played the Switch using the Joycon. I did not upgrade to a Pro Controller. So I used the Joycon with the Joycon grip. And I didn't really have a whole lot of problems with it, but I thought that it was okay comfortable. It was passable.
Mm-hmm.
The games are really what kept me playing the Switch. It wasn't the controller.
Yes.
But I didn't really have much of an issue with it. But that being said, once I moved on to the Pro Controller, there was no going back to the Joy-Con and the Joy-Con grip.
No. I'd been telling you for a while that you got to get a Pro Controller because I did it almost immediately. And because of that, I don't know that I was ever able to really enjoy the Joy-Con.
In terms of ergonomics, if you use the grip, it is passably comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's about a 6.
Yeah.
It's not great, but it's you can do it.
Yeah.
If you're not using the grip and you're just holding a Joy-Con by itself, oh my gosh, this is like a 1. It's very uncomfortable. You can technically play a game doing it, but boy, is it uncomfortable.
Yeah, now you're holding it sideways when you say that.
Yeah.
And that is awful, I agree. Now, if you have both Joy-Con and one in each hand, I think that's a better experience.
Not as good as holding it with the grip, but
No.
it's okay. It's maybe like a 4. So we're talking about, like, I'm averaging together the different ways you can use this. It's like a 6, a 4, and a 1. I think I'm going to have to go somewhere. I'm just going to give ergonomics for the Joy-Con a 4, which I think is about right in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to say my overarching complaint with the Joy-Con is that everything on them is too small. Everything is packed real tightly together, and my clumsy fingers are just bumping each other and hitting buttons I don't want them to hit. So I'm going to have to go with a 3 for ergonomics. So that brings us to a 7.
So let's talk D-pad and sticks on the Joy-Con. So first of all, there is no D-pad. It's just a cluster of 4 buttons, and they had to do that so that you could pull that controller out and use it as a standalone controller.
Yep.
I get why they had to do that. So we can't really talk about the D-pad, or we can say that the quote-unquote D-pad that's on there is awful because it's 4 separate buttons. I mean,
Yeah.
It technically works, but it's not a D-pad.
I've played quite a few like side scrollers on it, using it as a D-pad in handheld, and it does work, but it is nowhere near ideal.
No. The sticks feel okay, but they have such small amounts of travel that you kind of feel very constrained.
Mm-hmm.
I do like the way they feel, but there's not enough travel in the
Yeah,
sticks.
they're too small. I mean, obviously they've got the drift problem, and it's probably because they're so small and because that is so widely known that I just feel like I have to baby these sticks.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't go hard in the paint on them anyway, and then they don't move that far. You know, the rubberized texture is nice. It's not like they don't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And in handheld, I like them a lot more, like with a grip specifically, like, Satisfy grip or whatever. Yeah, and the lack of D-pad just offends me personally, so I'm going to have to give it a 2. I gave it 1 point per joystick.
I'm going to be a little more kind. I don't think it's great, but they are at least passable. I'm going to say they're a 4.
All right, a 6.
Buttons on the Joy-Con. The buttons are small, but they feel really good.
Yeah, they're very clicky.
Yeah. They're very clicky. They don't get that perfect clicky sponginess, but they feel good. I'm going to say that if they were just a hair spongier, I would like them more.
Mm-hmm.
And I would probably give them like an 8 or a 9.
Yeah.
But the way they stand right now, I'm going to give them a 7.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that I agree completely. The buttons do feel nice. They don't feel like overly plastic. They feel high quality.
Mm-hmm.
But they are, to me, overly clicky. There's not enough sponginess to them, and I think our perfect buttons are found on the Switch Lite. I don't know if you've ever messed with my Switch Lite, but its buttons are spongier, and they feel amazing.
Oh, okay.
It also adds the D-pad. But we're not talking Switch Lite, we're talking Joy-Con. So I'm gonna give the buttons a 7 as well.
It gives us a 14 for buttons on the Joy-Con. So innovation, our next category here. This is where I think the Joy-Con make up a lot of points because they're very modular. You can put them on the Switch. You can take them off. I mean, it is so, just the idea of that is so cool. This is a huge innovation. I don't know if it's going to stick around, but it seems like it's going to stick around at least with what Nintendo's doing.
Yeah. Just listen to this sound, Randy. Isn't that satisfying? You can plop these things on the Switch and play in handheld, and then you have what the Wii U Gamepad wanted to be.
Oh yeah, and you can take them off and you have that traditional home console experience. To me, I think this will end up being the most important innovation that Nintendo has given to controllers or just gaming in general.
Mm-hmm.
I may be wrong, but we will only see in time. It's just so new that we don't really know.
Yeah.
But to me, innovation-wise, I think this is going to be my first perfect 10.
I have a question for you, Randy, and it's okay if you say no, but I love the Switch so much, and I think it's such a great, innovative idea. Would you allow me an 11?
No, I will not allow you an 11. It's not fair. That is not what we're doing here. I know you really thought I was going to say yes.
I'm really disappointed in you. Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed Gaming Gig. This is the last episode that we'll be recording. Just kidding. We're now an exclusively acoustic Shovel Knight music cover band. Anyway, yeah. So we'll go with a perfect 20 on innovation since Randy's being a curmudgeon.
All right, so bias. I love the Switch. I love the Switch so much that I would even say that I know that the ergonomics, I know that the sticks, I know, those things are not great. It doesn't matter to me.
It doesn't matter.
I love it so much.
Yeah, and I knew when we were docking on ergonomics and giving it a hit on D-pads and sticks, that speaks to how great the games are, because it's still that good. Like, we still love it that much, even though the Joy-Con objectively aren't that great.
No, they're not. So in terms of bias, I almost want to give it a perfect score just because that's how biased I am towards Switch. But at the same time, if we were talking the Switch Pro controller, I would do that. But since we're talking Joy-Cons, I'm not going to give it a perfect 10. I know that the Joy-Con are not great.
Yeah.
They drift. The sticks and the ergonomics are not great. I want to give it a 9, but I think I'm going to give it an 8. I think I'm going to bump it down 2 points.
I hear you.
For my perfect score.
And I appreciate your integrity to the process. I, however, am not you. And I think the bias category is here so that we don't have to have such a high level of integrity. I know the Joy-Con aren't great either, but I can't separate the memories that I have with those games from the idea of the Joy-Con any more than I could for the N64. So I'm going to have to give it a 10. So that gives us an 18 for bias.
So that gives us a total of 65 for the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con controllers. That means we are at a tie for our top controller between the Super Nintendo controller and the Wii U Gamepad. So we've got to decide a winner here, Daniel. Is the Super Nintendo controller or the Wii U Gamepad a better controller?
Whew. Well, there's a Super Nintendo controller next to you over there if you want to grab it. I've got the gamepad in hand. I think we should just maybe not overcomplicate this and just kind of A-B them against each other. Kind of get our feels for the controllers. Click them buttons. Oh, those are some nice feeling sticks on the gamepad. Man, they're like butter. They smell like butter. Ugh. All right, we're going to switch them up here. I got the SNES controller in hand. Man, I'm riding Yoshi right now. I'm just straight back.
I know which one I'm going to pick. And I have to say, it's a tough decision.
I know which one I'm going to pick too, and it's a tough decision, and I'm learning something about myself I didn't know.
Do you want to go first, or do you want to?
I think we have to 3, 2, 1 it.
Okay.
3, 2, 1.
Gamepad. It's got to be the gamepad, man.
Yeah.
Ever since I first held this gamepad, I have always secretly in my heart thought, this is my favorite Nintendo controller. It just feels so good.
It really does. It makes me sad to say that I like that better than the SNES controller because, I mean, if we're talking about the library of games, there's no competition. No. Even though you could make the argument that the Wii U Gamepad has the SNES library on it. But, yeah, that just surprised me, man. That felt... And it was those sticks.
They feel so good.
Have you sniffed them?
They smell like butter, man.
Dude, smell like butter. So, guys, if you've stuck around this long, clearly you care about your Nintendo controllers. Maybe as much or more than we do. So let us know what you think. What's your favorite mainline controller? Be biased. Don't worry about your integrity. Just speak strongly, make hot takes, and let us know down in the comment section.
And guys, don't forget to follow us on Twitter. We are at Game and Gig.
And we're also starting up a new Twitch channel, which is also Game and Gig in all words. And we're going to be streaming some games over there. Going to be streaming some Sea of Thieves and probably some other stuff as well. So go throw us a follow, and we'd love to hear from you in the chat.
And until next time, I'm Randy.
And I'm Daniel.
And this has been Game and Gig.
Peace out.